Ways of thinking that diffuse responsibility tend to distribute blame across the members of a group rather than to place it on any individual. So for example, the schoolboy that gets caught from among a group of students who assaulted a teacher laments when he's making his defense himself, I know me one, yeah? And of course I know him one, but then he was involved. Where does he stand in taking responsibility? These mechanisms work by absolving individuals of moral agency, that is the ability that we all have as human beings to act freely, because there wouldn't be morality if we weren't free to act, eh? And that's very important for us to remember. So when we say XYZ made me do it, or we say I played such a small part in that something, I'm not really responsible, what we're doing is that we're engaging ways of thinking that are really forms of moral disengagement. Or what about the approach? And you notice I seem like I'm beating up on Vibes Cartel, but he's the one that comes to mind so readily with so many of the examples that I pay attention to. So Vibes, you know, shunts responsibility for the impact of his music on children onto the parents. You know, some say parents must accept responsibility for what their children listen to. So the DJ can effectively go ahead and sing any kind of song that he or she wants to, because the responsibility for making sure children don't hear his songs rests with the parents. They have come to recognize, and I'm sure many of you do too, that no raindrop is ever going to say that it's responsible for a hurricane. No raindrop.
That's a good one. That's a good one. That's a good one.
My third and final group, distortions of consequences, dehumanization, and attribution of blame. Reframe the effects of your actions or a person's actions either by minimizing the outcomes of these actions or minimizing the perception of distress that those actions cause other people. So, gone back to my scamming thing, you know, when we fleece money from elderly Americans, it seems that, you know, oh, it's harmless, as the victims get recast as wealthy, or having become wealthy themselves by unfair means, you know. So we do the thief from thief, God laughing. Or we recast these elderly Americans and mark them out and say, sure, them are white people, with the immediate implication that wrongdoing is inherent to that particular group of people. Now, unlike the first two mechanisms that I talked about previously, this next group of mechanisms is not intended to reframe the activity in a positive light. Rather, they work by minimizing the true consequences of those actions, that, you know, the true consequences that the actions have on others. So in a context of rampant corruption, the consequences for the state, for society, and so on gets minimized. And we don't seem to recognize that corruption is not a victimless crime. And in fact, that every single one of us is a victim of corruption. So where am I going with this? I want to make some arguments to you that I find that in Jamaican society, my diagnosis is that all of these mechanisms of moral disengagement are at play. However, I think we tend to cluster quite a bit around the mechanisms of diminishing, displacing, and diffusing responsibility as a Jamaican people. And I think there's a high incidence in our experience of, you know, diminishing responsibility, displacing it, diffusing it, and so on. And in a really lovely conversation that I had with Burchell Taylor, he gave me some insights into how this further functions. You know, Burchell talked about the fact that Jamaicans claim precedence. We have a way of creating moral niches. We have a way of creating what he calls moral hierarchies. And it made so much sense to me. You know, we have a way we call on precedence. So we say, you know, we're not the first ones doing it. Other people do it before we, you know. So by doing that, we absolve ourselves of responsibility for the action, because we're just following what other people do. So you catch a man and steal mangoes out of your yard, maybe, and he will turn to you and say, we have gone so far. You never said so to do it last week, you know. So why should I take any particular peculiar responsibility? I'm just one of several, you know. Or How about this very, very, very often heard phrase that we have in Jamaica where we talk about a sort of thing set, right? So things are ordered in a particular way. And that's a way of deflecting the responsibility that we have. So because things are ordered so, the thing set so, you and I can't do anything about it. We'll just go along with how things are. And a particularly troubling example of that for me is how many of us Jamaicans rob broken down delivery trucks, right? Or we rob accident victims. Some of you remember the story that was on the news a couple months ago of the shop owner who had her shop looted by people who claimed that they wanted to go look at this man that had been hurt when his vehicle smashed into her shop. And instead of helping the man, believe it or not, instead of helping the man, they helped themselves to the woman's goods. Them clean out our shop, clean, strip it bare. And I've heard and seen in context similar to that, a very worrying habit that Jamaicans have of seeing opportunities like that. And notice, I'd love to put opportunities in quotation marks. Opportunities to steal like that as having been provided to them by God. So, you know, God said it come. You ever hear we talk about tell lie upon God? Jamaican people love tell lie upon God. We love tell lie upon God. How about the creation of moral niches? See? So we talk about a politics that, or a business we are doing. You know, or we tell somebody, say, you know, business like this, so you back off. You can't really come say anything to me about what I'm doing, because you know business like this. And so we carve out spaces within which typical norms cannot function or cannot be allowed to take hold. So some of us under-invoice the goods that we import, or some of us direct scarce resources simply to party supporters, and we make the excuse. That's how we do things in politics in Jamaica, or that's how things have to be done in business in Jamaica if you want to get ahead. So I've gone back to the same thing. I saw the thing set. I really saw the thing set. Is that how we want the thing to set? Question for us to ask. A lot of us adults have a way of saying, a big people business that, yeah? And so we're saying that the same moral standards are not expected in similar circumstances with big people and little people, right? And so many of us who are parents or who get involved in parenting might find ourselves caught up in that kind of moral hierarchy where we're saying we can behave a particular way, but because you're a child, you can't. And then we end up with pictures like the one that I showed you earlier on, where our children call upon us and hold us accountable for the very dishonesty and deception of such an approach. So I talked a little bit about the outcomes of moral disengagement, and that persons who are high in moral disengagement demonstrate lower levels of moral awareness of ethical issues than those who are low in moral disengagement, and so on. And the fact is that moral disengagement does benefit us. It will benefit us personally, it will benefit the in-group that we're a part of, but in the long run, does it benefit the society? And then we still have to ask the question, does it really truly benefit us in the way that we believe beyond the short term? So where do I want to go from here? I want to go from here to look at a way forward. What I'm calling my TRP, or my Treatment, Rehabilitation and Prevention Plan. And I want to go back to my disease and dis-ease imagery. It is clear, or I'm hoping it's clear by this point, that a disease of epidemic proportion is affecting not just a few individuals, but most, if not all, of our Jamaican population. Moral dis-ease is slowly but surely killing the Jamaican nation. The presence of disease is diagnosed by the prevalence of interpersonal violence, comfort with dishonesty and disrespect, as well as low levels of productivity and commitment to the nation. A multiplicity of agents, vectors, and environmental conditions, such as weak socialization, inappropriate values, high levels of moral disengagement, inadequate moral education, and high levels of poverty and social exclusion are responsible for Jamaican society being affected by moral degenerative syndrome, MDS. Eradicating these agents and risk factors is necessary to prevent reinfection and further spread especially among the younger generation, who are particularly vulnerable. Vectors of transmission like education, the media, popular culture can be redeployed as treatment delivery methods. And I firmly believe that, even as, sometimes people ask me how I can be a good little Catholic girl and like dancehall music. It's not, to my mind, there's not really any conflict there at all, because dancehall is not this homogeneous, monolithic, process or cultural artifact, but it's actually a lot more complex than we give recognition to. So overall, eradicating MDS will involve changing mental models, the attitudes, the habits, the virtues that we have, while reforming and reforming institutions and systems within the society. At the same time, it is important to treat the persons who have come down with the illness, and many of us have it. This will oftentimes require aggressive intervention, leading to quarantine where necessary. Quarantine. All of this suggests that our TRP approach must be multi-pronged and will likely include all or some of the following. And I'm going to list and hopefully have time to discuss with you a couple of those. So some of the approaches that I think we could take would include the identification, acceptance, and celebration of what's great about Jamaica and Jamaicans, because we are a great people. In spite of the fact that I'm saying that I think we're suffering from an illness, that illness has not so taken us over that we no longer continue to be a great people. I am very happy and very proud to be Jamaican. We also could take account of consensus around the values on which our society is currently built or currently being built. A commitment to including all Jamaicans in the society through education, training, and opportunities for employment and the exercise of creativity. Acceptance of and commitment to moral leadership on the part of those who lead. And oftentimes when we hear discussions or discourse around leadership, we immediately assume that we're talking about political leadership. But political leadership is not the only kind of leadership. And perhaps this is part of the reason that so many of us have abdicated the leadership roles that we have. Teachers, parents, elders, corporate leaders, policemen and women. And of course, my favorite riding horse, dancehall DJs are also leaders in Jamaican society. So I'm just going to pick out one or two of these and talk with you a little bit about those before I sit down. And I think it might make sense to talk to you a little bit about, one of the things that I'm interested in is the teaching of ethics in school, church, workplace, etc. Because ethical dilemmas and problems are very, very prevalent in our everyday life. Yet despite this, few of us have been trained in moral reasoning. Teaching ethics in school is therefore an important therapeutic intervention that I think we have to engage. It is important to develop critical skills in the area of ethical decision making. It cannot simply be a case of us saying to our young people, "Thou shalt not," and expect that they will understand where the thou comes from and why the thou and the shall not are important. But rather we should spend some time providing skills to them so that they can undertake more reasoning and develop more maturely in the moral dimension of their lives. There are reasonably simple methods, that can be taught and used. There's a method called the STOP method, which can serve as a model. It's in 4 stages. S, you search out the facts and identify the motives and the circumstances. T, you think through alternatives and consequences. O, you consult others, you look at the effect of your actions on others. And then P, for those of us that are affiliated in some way religiously, there's an important space for the P of prayer, praying for guidance, where religious faith is part of your circumstance, or where it's not, proceed to act, because act we must.